Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to call the Justice and Public Safety Committee meeting to order. The first item on the agenda, or the second item actually, is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The third item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion? Motion by Romano, support by Kraft. Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor, please vote yes on your iPad. Got them all? Got them all? The agenda is adopted. Item number 4, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion? Motion by Carabelli, supported by Lucido. Any discussion on the minutes? Please vote on your tablet. Item number 5 is public participation. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Mr. Hunt, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Macomb County Board of Commissioners, Justice and Public Safety Committee. Joseph Hunt, 8306 Stanley, homeowner and taxpayer, City of Warren, Michigan. I reside over at 12 in Van Dyke, and I wanted to come in to hear the Community Corrections presentation. A lot of the issues that were found up in the backup material do show that when someone is incarcerated or jailed, basically the release times held 2 to 3 days, that they're more likely to commit new crimes, and when held 8 to 14 days, the risk is like 50%. The issue does come down to is that I reviewed the 164-page study that actually was a seething dissertation of the way that the courts and the jail and the whole prosecutor's office is handling people that are arrested and processed through the system. I feel that Community Corrections is doing a great job, as I know people that have gone through the process. The issue does come down to what I would like to find out, maybe perhaps through the presentation, is when dealing with individuals that are low-risk individuals and releasing them to the community. I see here under the metrics that there were 1,206 assessments and there were 322 jail-based CRPs, on whether or not that there's some information that can be gathered on where the individuals that are incarcerated and that go through the problem, where in the 482 square miles of Macomb County that the problem centers are actually located. I happen to have a understanding that probably most of it's from the City of Warren, but I don't know that for sure because I don't really have access to the information about those individuals that go through the Community Corrections Program. A lot of it appears to be drug-related, and therefore that there's a low risk. But as a result of that 164-page study that I've read multiple times over, it appears that a lot of the pretrial services that could go towards curing somebody through substance abuse counseling or inpatient treatment could basically counter a lot of the negative effects that we're seeing, at least in Warren, regarding rampant opiate use. I do see here at the last page of the presentation that there's a barrier, the lack of linked data for all district and circuit courts. Well, in Macomb County, we just have one circuit court, and then, of course, we have the other trial courts, which are the district courts. And I guess my question would be as on whether or not Community Corrections has worked with the Sheriff's Department, the prosecutor's office, and the court system to communicate with the Supreme Court on whether or not that there's any grant funds available. The way I see it is that there's a lot of the wheels of justice are somewhat slow, and if you've read that report like I did, it's sort of like very glaring on what the recommendations are. But I feel that this is a good, Community Corrections does what they can in order to return people to society without committing additional crimes. But I'd be interested if there's any metrics as far as where in the county where many of these crimes are taking place. I always had this firm belief that a lot of the crime takes place in trailer parks and people that live in apartments, but I could be wrong. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to address the committee? Seeing none, we'll close public participation and move to our presentation on the Community Corrections overview.
Good afternoon. My name is Barb Caskey. I am the director of Macomb County Community Corrections. It's a little better. And I appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today to discuss the programming that Community Corrections provides, particularly focusing on the pretrial programming that we discussed when the overview of the jail reform study took place. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of our other programming, but really focusing on that. You can see that we brought in a general overview PowerPoint presentation. Community Corrections was developed in the mid-'80s by the state of Michigan under Public Act 511. Really as a response to overcrowding in our state prison system and our local jails as a result of the crack cocaine epidemic, much like what we have going on now with our opiate use epidemic. We have community corrections offices in most of the counties across the state. Some of them encompass several counties and more of the more rural areas. In Macomb, obviously, we are fortunate to just have our own office and focus on the large number of individuals that we are servicing in our county. We have three different types of services or services that take place at three different stages in the criminal justice system. One, again, being pretrial services. We also provide alternative sentencing options to the district and circuit courts in Macomb County. And also substance abuse assessment and treatment services, as well as drug testing, electronic monitoring, things of that nature to probationers in circuit court in Macomb County. To talk specifically about pretrial services, and again, I know we talked a little bit about this through the jail reform study, but really the purpose of our pretrial program is to identify those individuals who are low risk and could be appropriately supervised in the community with limited or no conditions. Those individuals who are moderate or higher risk, we typically are identifying those specific needs and making recommendations for supervision tools specific to that defendant. That may be drug testing, outpatient or inpatient substance abuse or mental health programming, as well as electronic monitoring. And those individuals who are high risk and who are determined to be better supervised in a correctional facility until they reach the disposition of their case. We all know, and again, I'm sure you're familiar with when the jail study was released, that our pre-sentence population in the jail really fluctuates at just about 50% to over that about 60%, which is a large amount of individuals who are sitting in the county jail who have not been yet convicted of the charge that they have against them or charges. The goal of pretrial programming is to really try to use data that's been gathered across the country really for the last couple of decades that indicates there are certain specific sort of factors that we can look at with each individual that will tell us, based on statistics, what their risk is in terms of failing to appear for court or being non-compliant with in the community while they're awaiting disposition of their case. We know that the pretrial population impacts our jail space. It takes up a large number, usually more than half of the jail space that we have. It also reduces, likelihood of future recidivism is impacted, and it allows defendants to remain stable in their employment, to continue residing with their families in the community, their finances, mental health and substance abuse treatment as well. Again, I mentioned those evidence-based risk factors, and these are typically used with every pretrial program across the country because we know that the data behind that says that these really are the predictive factors of someone failing to appear for court or becoming non-compliant in the community. Their primary charge, their release pending trial at time of arrest. What that means is that were they arrested for another case, released, and then picked up another charge while they were in the community. Their criminal history, 2 or more failure to appears, makes a lot of sense. If they've failed to appear before, likely to do it again. Their history of violent convictions, the length of their current residence, and are they employed or a primary caregiver, and their history of drug abuse. Again, this is research that was presented to the board, I know by myself a couple years ago, and I think some of it was also highlighted in the reform study, that we know that if you take someone who's low risk and you detain them for the entire pretrial period, they're more likely to be sentenced to a jail term, a prison term, and that their prison terms and jail terms are significantly longer than those who are released on a pretrial basis. And again, more research to indicate if you have someone that comes in and they're held for even 2 to 3 days, those low-risk defendants are almost 40% more likely to commit new crimes than equivalent defendants who were held for no more than 24 hours. It sort of makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that within 24 hours, you're gonna have to call an employer and tell them why you're not coming to work. You're gonna have to call your wife and tell her why you're not coming to home. There are a lot of things that can be impacted in that period of time. And when they're held for 8 to 14 days, that risk increases to 51%. The components of pretrial programming, when we administer a risk and screening tool, based on the score and the outcome of that tool, determine whether we need to recommend any programming at all, whether we think that they would be suitable to be in the community and will on their own show up for court and not participate in new criminal activity. Or it could indicate that drug and alcohol testing are required. Telephone reporting, which we know increases the likelihood in a number of different pretrial programs that they've studied, that having a telephone reporting program can increase the rate of appearance at court by 25% just with the telephone call to remind them they have a hearing. We also have in-person reporting and electronic monitoring, or also known as tether, various types of that, GPS tether, the RF tethers, SoberLink and Scram, which are both alcohol monitoring tethers. Outpatient substance abuse and mental health programming, and residential substance abuse treatment for up to 90 days. Outside of our pretrial programming, we also have alternative sentencing, which is really focused in Macomb County on those individuals with identified substance abuse needs. We have a good relationship with both the district and the circuit courts, who refer a number of individuals to us on a regular basis that are identified as having a substance abuse need. And you've probably heard the statistics before. It's 85 to 90% of anyone who's incarcerated has a substance abuse issue. And so we work with those courts and our probation departments, as well as our vendors that provide substance abuse treatment, and the Department of Corrections, who funds the majority of our office, to identify programming that can be anywhere from 12 to 180 days in length, depending on that person's need and where they're at in our criminal justice system. These, the data that we included in our presentation is also numbers that I'm sure some of you have seen before. We know that it costs more to incarcerate someone. We know that that there is a 30% reduction in recidivism when you apply appropriate treatment to an individual rather than traditional punishments like incarceration. And our jail overcrowding issues are not going to be resolved anytime soon. Regardless of how big you build it, we will fill it. And looking at smarter, more behavior conscious criminal justice is sort of where a lot of counties and states are heading, and we're trying to do the same in Macomb County. Just an overview of some of the residential services that are provided. The Michigan Department of Corrections will pay for up to 90 days of substance abuse treatment for any individual who is charged with or convicted of a felony and is currently on probation. We also have what we call our MRAP, or Macomb Residential Alternative to Prison, which is up to 180 days of residential treatment for someone who would otherwise be prison bound. That programming encompasses more than just substance abuse treatment. It's really focusing on employment readiness, peer recovery coaching that starts in the facility and then continues when they're in the community. And also, obviously, substance abuse with an opiate-specific track. More sort of overview of some of the residential programs that we have, and we also have relationships with providers in the community. MCOSA is a large supporter of our programming, and if we have an individual that comes to us and is not appropriate or not eligible for funding through our services for residential treatment, we have a collaborative relationship where we can provide the assessment for someone, send it to them, and then they determine an authorized residential treatment through their funding. Also, outpatient programming. We have been, for a number of years, providing dual diagnosis services for those individuals who have both substance abuse and mental health concerns that allows them to have access to a psychiatrist when they're released. There is no, 2-month wait to get in to see that psychiatrist or the medications that they need to stay stable in the community. Our opiate-specific groups, again, we continue to try to focus resources on those opiate sort of specific clientele that our numbers continue to climb. Our marijuana-specific group and our cognitive behavioral programming in the community. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, we have other programs such as electronic monitoring. We do a lot of tether monitoring that the judge can order an individual to be, rather than held in the jail, released to the community and be supervised in electronic monitoring for up to a year. And we are able to provide some assistance for those individuals who are indigent and cannot afford those costs because it can be very expensive. A drug testing for both misdemeanors and we also have felony-specific programs. And our March program, which is a community service program that we have individuals that typically you would be ordered to a certain amount of hours, 100, 200 hours of community service, and you could do something like go rake leaves somewhere. We have implemented a number of years ago a very structured program where we set up relationships with nonprofits in the community that needed help and said, would you be willing to actually supervise these individuals in a 7-hour workday? Sign off every day that they work, send us the information. We will certainly take care of any behavioral issues because we will address that directly with the courts and the probation departments. And that program has been extremely successful and has even allowed opportunities for long-term employment for a couple of the participants. And our jail-based CRP program provides cognitive behavioral programming while individuals are incarcerated in the county jail. And again, our assessments and recommendations for probation. Just a run through of some of the FY16 services, obviously with us being in the middle of fiscal year 17 where we don't have those closeout numbers yet. But just an idea of how many individuals, we're looking at 700 individuals that we placed in substance abuse treatment over the course of that year. About 1,200 pretrial screenings, and 614 monitored and pretrial services. We are hoping to do much more than that in the future. And just a couple of items that we'll be talking about these both in our budget submission, but some of the barriers that we have to sort of continued growth and successful programming. The lack of linked data systems for all district and circuit courts. Again, identified in the reform study, there is no central data location for our district courts. They, if you want to find out if someone has an upcoming court date or if they showed up for court today, you're literally picking up the phone and calling each and every one of the circuit courts, or I'm sorry, district courts that you have individuals at. Obviously, the relationship that we have with our circuit court, we're able to get information much more quickly through court view, as well as email access to some of that information. The minimal amount of individuals that we're able to reach prior to arraignment for pretrial services is a result of all of the local PDs that we have that hold individuals when they're arrested for, it may be 24 hours and maybe up to a week. So that we're really only able to access those individuals who are arrested and brought directly to the Macomb County Sheriff's Department. And the short time frame from booking to arraignment that requires the reports to be submitted means you have to have individuals who are working very hard in the early morning hours to assess those individuals, run their criminal histories, verify information, and then get that to the court before, say, a 10 o'clock arraignment. So it's a busy, busy office from about 7 to 10 o'clock in the morning. And again, continued rise in opiate use resulting in increased need for treatment. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. You are all aware of it, and we're doing our best to increase the services that we have available to address that issue. So, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Mm-hmm.
Supported by Majak. Commissioner Kleinfeld.
Thank you, Chair. I understand why when somebody's pre-trial, why they're more likely to commit crimes and things because they lose jobs and all of those sorts of things. But why are they more likely to be sentenced to jail, and why are they more likely to be sentenced to longer terms than others?
It's a very good question. I think that's probably a result of a number of things. If you have a defendant that comes in front of you in the court, as the court, and makes, you know that this individual has been successful in the community for a number of months while they're awaiting sentencing, and this individual, for whatever reason, needed to be incarcerated, I think that sort of can taint, your perception of that defendant one way or the other.
Okay, and this might be a naive question, but are those that are sitting in jail? Do they come in a jail uniform? The reason I'm confused on this is because I see high-profile cases. I know the person's in jail, but they come in a nice outfit. But I've also seen prisoners come into court in jail outfits, brought in, and so I don't know why that is, and why that occurs sometimes, but not always.
For the most part, they come in a jail uniform. There are specific circumstances where if they have someone who brings them, and most often in a trial situation, if they have someone, a family member that's able to secure clothing for them and bring them that to them, that they're allowed to change out. But in most cases, they are wearing a jail uniform.
So do you think there's a psychological component to having somebody in front of you, maybe not in a trial, but maybe even a judge, having somebody in front of you wearing a prison uniform as opposed to wearing a suit because they're out?
I would think yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Kleinfeld actually touched on the core of my question. I too was confused if there are two defendants that are otherwise equal, and one is held for 24 hours, one is held for 48 hours. There's a 40% chance more that the person held for 40 hours will recommit a crime than the person held for 24, even if all other factors are equal?
Based on the data from the Arnold Foundation, I believe I cited it on that actual side, they're more likely to, and let me go back to that so I make sure we're, more likely to commit new crimes before trial. So within that period prior to the disposition of their case, they're 40% more likely to commit new crime.
Huh. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you for coming here
No
today.
problem.
First of all, I am not an expert in the jail and treatment and criminal justice, so I apologize if I come across as wanting to learn a lot of things here. But my question to you is, first of all, and this is to the whole board, we had a presentation by Sheriff Wickersham last month about the new jail proposal, central booking, more brick and mortar, and things like that. And we'll see how much that's going to cost. It's going to come back to this Board of Commissioners in the next year, I believe, and this board is going to have to make a decision on where to go about on that. Early talk right now is bond proposal on a ballot. That's the early talk. There's a lot of different ways to finance something like that. Sure. That would be one. But the thing that really bothers me, and I've thought this for years because I have been in the jail a lot, and just knowing that you're saying 85 to 90% of the people in the jail, what's that? I've been at the jail a lot for tours.
Is that what's doing it?
Okay, not that way. I don't want to. But the thing that's shocking, you said just now, 85 to 90% of all the people in the jail right now have substance abuse problems.
Yes, and you'll find that in most correctional facilities across the country, whether it's federal, state, local.
I mean, that just seems unacceptable. And for those numbers to be so high, I feel like we as a society, the county, the courts, the jail, that we've failed, literally. I mean, I think that's just unacceptable. And let me just finish also. So the thing is you know, and this is me as a county commissioner, public official, and this is me as a private citizen thinking this way. How can we go out and ask residents for a certain amount of dollars to build the central booking? I'm for and all that. I understand all that, okay? But to build, you know, more rooms and stuff, which is more expensive, it's a lot cheaper for treatment. You know, so that's one thing that I think about, which I'm going to have to look at on whether or not how we're going to finance this next year, ballot proposal or tax increase or whatever. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't know where the rest of you commissioners think, but that's my thinking. I want to hear a response from you about that.
No, and I'd like to comment on that because I think that what the core goals of the recommendations are that came from that study are really to not add a whole ton of more beds. What they're trying to do is take the system that we have and do it more effective so that, one, the central intake can identify those individuals who are most appropriate for some other kind of programming. If we know when somebody walks in that they're mentally ill and that they have chronic substance abuse problems, we want the physical space and the staff there to be able to identify that immediately. And that really is ingrained in that proposal, which I was very happy to see. And there's also the idea that the space that we have for those individuals who might not be appropriate for release to the community, say for instance mental health cells, that the way that they're set up now, you know, that the plan that is proposed takes that and really upgrades the way that we think about even holding prisoners who have mental health issues.
Let me stop you right there
Sure.
and ask you a question. So, do they have other parts of the country that have a jail or central booking system similar to what we want to do? Do you know of that? And have they implemented something like that where it's reduced or helped out or reduced substance abuse people in the jail?
In terms of reduction of the number of substance abuse or substance abusers within the jail, I can't speak to that. I know that there are several programs that I'm aware of across the country that have developed this type of central intake system. I know one was in a direct response to mental health needs that they had in their community, and they did see a reduction of individuals who came in with mental health needs that were being supervised, and those issues were being managed in the community. But I'd be happy to look into the sort of specific substance abuse.
Okay, do you understand where I'm coming
Yes,
from,
I
what I'm
absolutely
telling you
do.
about? It just seems that if we put more energy, money, people into substance abuse and mental health, we're going to have less people in the jail. If we have less people in the jail, it's going to cost society, the taxpayers, less money, which is what we're always looking to do, right, Leon? We're always looking to do that.
And I completely understand with what you're saying, and I think that that's an appropriate response. The problem that we have is that individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system, whether treatment services are available in the community, sort of find themselves incarcerated before they even get to treatment. So it ends up being that we're still providing them with treatment because that's the first place that we are exposed to them at, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They don't walk into a treatment center. They involuntarily come to us.
Okay, thanks for coming here, and I'll just leave with this, that I hope other commissioners might share some of my thoughts, and especially the ones who are lawyers, Rob, Kathy, Bob, or have some criminal justice experience would take a look at that or offer suggestions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. I'm a little confused, though, as to who uses your services, how they're used, which courts. I mean, is it mandated, is it not? I mean, I'm kind of new into the law business of this. So, you know, it seems to me when I look at 48 to 60% of the population is, you know, currently is pre-sentenced people, then it's hard for me to imagine that you guys are, you know, using this with every arrestee. Is that more
No.
the focus of what we want to do down the line?
Yes, absolutely.
And so right now, like what percentage of arrestees that do you guys even see?
That's a very good question. And that's one of the barriers that we talked about is because only certain individuals are brought directly to the sheriff's department after they're arrested. We only have access to those individuals before they're arraigned. And the whole goal of that is to get that information in front of the court so they have that information to make the decision that they're going to make about bail and whatever other conditions that are going to be. So currently, we focus on those courts that bring them directly there. with the staffing that we have, we're able to see about 10% of the bookings that come into the jail. It averages about 350, 360 bookings a week, and we see about 40 individuals a week.
Really?
So there is a great need for expansion in terms of pretrial services, not only with staff, but again, with the jail reform study that came out, the physical space to put staff. You literally run out of room to put workstations if we had them to be able to go into the jail and see them.
Because, I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it would seem that since you're seeing such a small percentage of a small percentage, basically, right? Because, I mean, south of Hall Road, really, for the most part, isn't going in and being booked at the sheriff department. So it seems like there's a huge part of this population that's taking up beds in the prison system that might be eligible and even recommended for a different treatment, a tether, all of these different things that get them out. I don't understand. Do any of the other police departments, are they able to use you if they want? Or
yes, absolutely. The system that we have, and we have a very positive working relationship with all the district courts in our area, and the way that functions is a little bit differently because we don't have access to them. But what will happen is that when they're seen at arraignment, those judges will make immediate referrals to us for a bond recommendation. So it's not a pretrial report that gets to them that quickly, but they're asking for our information and our input into where they should be after the first time that individual is in front of the judge. We see a number of those. We have very high numbers from 37th and 39th, as well as 40th district courts.
But being that you only get to see a small percentage of even the people that come into the jail and at the sheriff department, I mean, are you even able to handle all those requests, the other district court requests?
Yeah, so with additional staffing that we have with our clinical side, our pretrial specialists are the ones that take care of those pre-arraignment reports, and then we have clinical staff that are above and beyond that take care of the requests for whether it be outpatient substance abuse or inpatient residential, things like that. So there are additional staff.
It seems like there should be some type of a study that's able to be done that would show increased staff on your side, which gets to see, 80 to 90% at least of the population coming in, and what that, being able to see all them, how much that would reduce our in-house costs. I mean, because if a lot of these people, so you see, I don't know what you just said. I forget the percentage.
About 10%.
It was a low percent, right? I'm just saying it was something ridiculously
it's very
low.
small.
So out of that 10%, like how many do you find you can defer to, out of the jail? And I don't really know right now, I don't care, but I'm just saying, so even in that small percentage, if you're taking 40% of them and saying, all right, tether, different programs that don't require jail space, that would be exponentially larger and probably save us a ton of money down the line. It would seem like we could get, like that would be the study I would love to see on how to expand your program on really what it could save in jail space before we start looking at, are we rebuilding a jail with as many beds, or does would your program expanded cause us to need half the beds?
Well, and I think that's really, and like I mentioned before, that the whole idea of us being able to bring more staff in to be able to do those pretrial recommendations and screenings and being able to identify individuals who might be appropriate for specialty courts or residential treatment, things like that. The way that the jail design is right now, we literally don't have people, we don't have room for people. So if we expanded the amount of office staff that we had, clinicians, pretrial staff, there's nowhere to put them. And there's also, you've gotten to a point where there's nowhere to complete assessments, within the jail because of the areas that, you're sort of left with once you have lawyer visits and, things like that, so that it becomes a logistical issue, which I think is what they're trying to fix with some of those proposals.
Okay. Just seems like there's a lot more to do before we start looking at a millage for a new jail. I mean, and I agree. I think I'm on your track right there with trying to figure out what the long-term plan is and what that should bring us before we build another, 1,000-bed jail and realize that increasing your guys' capacity could require us a 400-bed jail, right? I mean, or cause us to require only that. I'd like to see a little more of that, and not, I don't need any more answers on it, but I think I see where we should be looking right now. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Barb. My understanding from the jail study was pretty clear. If you look at it, the gentleman said, look, if we don't do money and stuff into pretrial services, if we don't focus on pretrial services, we're going to have to double the number of beds that we have in the jail. So if we don't do something with pretrial services, we're going to go from 1,800 beds to something like 2,800 beds that we're going to need. And I remember asking Sheriff Wickersham, I said, look, I'm not a guy that likes brick and mortar. I shop on Amazon, right? I mean, that's a terrible thing to say for retail. But the bottom line is data is what's really important here. And that's what pretrial services is excellent at doing. And I can tell you as a private attorney, you know, information that they provide is very helpful to the judges, to the attorneys, in terms of helping us decide right at the get-go what's an appropriate thing to do for a client or a defendant that's in front of the court. Now, I want to ask you some questions, if I could.
Okay.
Now that I've pontificated. There's no question that there's a lack, that link, there should be a link between all the district courts and the circuit court. I'm amazed at this day and age that we don't have that. When I'm in court at 39th District Court and I have somebody that I'm appointed on or something like that, it's amazing that nobody at the 39th District Court can tell if this person has a case at 36, because they often do. They often have another case at 37th, and they have a matter at in the 40th District Court. Sure. So, ironically, we had the IT guy here yesterday. Have you met with him? Have you talked to him?
We have had ongoing conversations with IT, with our assigned staff, and the improvements that we can make, and some of the projects that are going on that they have with Circuit Court. We're kind of it's sort of a waiting pattern to see what they come with there before we can either link into that or come up with our own version of how to access that information.
Because I think from what Chair Smith said and what Chair not Chair Majek, but Commissioner Majek said, for us to make a decision, I agree with the study. More data means less brick and mortar. That's not to say that we're not going to have to do brick and mortar, but data is cheaper than brick and mortar. You agree?
Well, if that's what the data points to. And
yeah.
My understanding of this study, there's not a drastic increase in the number of beds.
That's right.
It's changing the way that we do what we're doing.
As long as the number of beds will not be that drastic, as long as we provide a good pretrial service. Yeah. So and I asked Sheriff Wickersham, he said he was going to come back and show us some diagrams and some plans. And I asked him, and I want to make this clear, I don't want to just see brick and mortar plans. I want to see what we're talking about with linking the district courts and the circuit courts so that data can be shared. I want to see some ideas of what pretrial services is going to do so that we can implement that most important part of that study, which ultimately is designed to make it so that we don't have to build a whole new jail or more beds. And so I'd like to have your commitment that you and Sheriff Wickersham and the IT guy would be able to at some point give us a plan so that when I don't know if it's going to be for this year's budget, sure, but at some point for the commission to take a look at that. I think that's very important.
It is, and I definitely worked closely with the consultants that came in to look at the pretrial programming and the diversion programming to treatment that they were proposing, and was involved in what they were looking at for essential intake facilities so that our staff would have the ability, the space, and the access, to prisoners to be able to, get that. But I do agree, the lack of information that we have about what, who's being arrested in Macomb County, that took a very long time for them to access because there is no central location for that. So I agree with that.
We need that. One last thing, and I don't like to really compare ourselves to them, okay? Yeah. But Oakland County. Oakland County has a very extensive pretrial service.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they have pretrial service personnel in the courts.
In every district court, yeah.
Okay. Has that been thought of for Macomb? In other words, if you're talking about space at the jail that you need for your database, why can't we just use all the courts that we've already got structures for and put pretrial personnel there and have a link to a central database? You need a couple offices at the jail where this information can be exchanged. Is that a feasible possibility?
It's an option. It's, I think, a more expensive and sort of cumbersome operation than we would like to see, because not only are we talking about screening for pretrial services and that report that would be given to the court, but you're also looking at screening for mental health issues that need to be addressed immediately, in addition and above and beyond that. So.
Well, I get that, but really, most actions start at the district court.
Yes.
And so when somebody's picked up by the police in Roseville, they're hauled in front of the district court judge, hopefully within 24 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
If you have pretrial personnel assigned to that court, instead of being out in the Macomb County Jail, it just seems like the information could be quicker. That's what we're looking for. And if we have a link with the internet, we've got central database that we can use to exchange that information. It's an option that I'd like to see.
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, as you're well aware, they're doing it in Oakland County.
That's right. And I hate to compare ourselves to, as Oakland County gets snooty when I go out there, but they do have they do have a pretty efficient system, and they have a bigger population than we do, and their jail, they seem to maintain somewhat of control on that. So I would definitely like to see your plans. I think, and let me just say this, before I vote on anything, I want to see your plans first, because I think your plans are integral from what I saw in that report to making sure that we get the right bang for our buck when it comes to whatever we're going to do here with the jail. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Romano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question and then some statements, if I may. Thank you for coming. These residential services that you offer, are those costs ever reimbursed to us by either the I don't want to call them a criminal, but the drug abuser, and they are criminals, the drug abuser or the families, they ever reimburse us back any of those costs?
No, but the majority of them are not funded by the county. The majority of our funding comes from the Michigan Department of Corrections, and they pay for those residential services out of their budget. We do receive some funding, and then we're able to link with, like I mentioned before, Macosa's funding. If someone has, say, for example, Healthy Michigan or Medicaid, that they're able to tap into those. So our the amount of money that we actually pay for residential services is fairly small.
So, I'm sorry, so the same question, the individual themselves, do they pay?
If they have coverage or if they're able to in certain circumstances, they pay directly to the provider. Otherwise, no, it's not reimbursed to us.
And we can't go back to the families looking for payment?
I suppose you could. That would take some additional accounting and staff in my office to be able to track that down in terms of something similar to a jail reimbursement.
You know, it just seems to me that we have the residential services, we have the outpatient program. I see a lot of things that we're doing for the abusers. I don't see too much that we're doing for the residents. I hear people saying they don't want any more brick and mortar. I certainly want more brick and mortar. I don't want these people on the street. Now, I'm not talking about the marijuana user and the guy that pops the pills. I'm talking about the hard people that go out, will rob, steal, cheat, whatever's necessary, and they're doing it to our residents so that they can get these drugs. So the problem is, let's get to the root of the problem, and again, this is just a statement, which is the people that are providing these drugs. So the sheriff locks them up. I don't want these people back on the street. Now, your programs sound wonderful, but as you and I both know, and the commissioners know, the rate of recidivism is outstanding. These people go to jail, and they talk to the other jail inmates, and they get more places to pick up their drugs or their junk or whatever they're going to do. So even though your programs are warm and fuzzy, I don't think they're solving the problem, and I think Sheriff Wickersham has the right idea. Put them where they're being, and I'm talking, now, please appreciate, I'm talking about the hard drug users that are back and forth. They're in your program 2 or 3 times, am I correct? Once they can come into your program 2 or 3 times.
Yes, they can.
Yeah. So we're paying for all that. So it's nice to have these programs, but I think they're a waste of money. The hardcore ones, stick them in the brick and mortar, let them pay the price. They're criminals. They should be charged as criminals and treated as criminals. That's my personal opinion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Dujay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Barb, thank you very much for coming here and discussing the overview. The question on recidivism, and it goes along with part of what everybody's talked about. Have you tracked the people that are in the JJC, whether graduates, if you will, from the JJC end up at the adult jail as a percentage?
No, I do not have any access to the information on those individuals who have been in the JJC, and most of that information wouldn't be readily available to most because it's juvenile charges, so they're likely, those are things that are sort of protected.
I'm just wondering if they're not going along with Commissioner Romano's statement, if they're not defining their craft at the JJC and graduating into bigger and better things. I think it'd be interesting to see if there is a correlation. 1, 2, although there is a lot of talk about brick and mortar and so on and so forth, common sense tells me that the more population we have, the more people we're going to have that end up in jail one way or another. That being said, Do we have a lot of people going into jail and so on and so forth, or that you see that are getting brought in on pot charges versus the heroin abusers or users?
No, I would say without actual data in front of me, but just our sort of anecdotal information from working in the jail every day and with the population, compared to a felony possession of a controlled substance, which is a opiate or heroin, cocaine, things of that nature. Those are a much greater percentage than what your possession of marijuanas are, which is a misdemeanor offense in most cases, depending on the quantity.
All right. We get a report from the medical examiner as far as people ODing on heroin and so on and so forth, and that really is something that's an epidemic going on in Macomb County, throughout Michigan, actually, but it's something nobody ever talks about. Do you see people coming back on the opioid or heroin bandwagon, if you want to put it, that the recidivism rate is rather high, or do you see people that are graduating out of it and getting out of that, other than dying?
We see both. What we've seen that has been kind of, and again, it's sort of a newer issue, so having hard data on that I can actually speak to is difficult, but we see both. And what you are seeing is that this opiate use is sort of, it's a younger population, and what we are seeing is groups of individuals who are kind of starting their own recovery systems. You will now, in any area of the county, go to a 12-step program or a Narcotics Anonymous program, if you're familiar with that term, and see groups of young people who are in recovery and who are maintaining sobriety. And so on one hand, where you still do have a very high recidivism rate, whether it's in the criminal justice population or just in the general community, you do see sort of a new idea of recovery with these individuals who have been using either prescription drugs or prescription opiates and heroin. Really? So it's an interesting phenomenon. As you see the same population, you see sort of recovery changing to meet that population.
All right, very good. Interesting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your presentation. Like Commissioner Majek, I don't have a criminal justice background, so I'm learning a lot, so bear with me. You may have answered this question already when Commissioner Leonetti was rattling off questions to you, but it deals with the barriers about the link systems. Is that an issue from us as a county? Is that a state, does that need to be a state law? Is that because we at the county don't have the technology to do that? Are there barriers because there are state laws on the books that says you can't transfer that data from this court to that court? What's the reason for that?
It's because the majority of those district courts run on their own systems using, I don't even think there's a really like a single system that's used most of the time by the district courts. It really, really varies into the degree of what information it holds and what you can glean from it. But I know that it's really a separation of county services and even the district courts that are within the county and the district courts that are outside of us, as well as the other layers of juvenile court and things like that. So it's just the systems are so separate. Very similar to what the sheriff had talked about with the presentation, that with the local police departments, the same sort of idea, very separate, that information, those people, all of those things don't flow very easily because they're so disconnected.
Okay, and I know Commissioner Leonetti said that Oakland County is a little more efficient. Do they have a linked system, or are they like us, but they're just better at performing? I'm trying to figure this out.
That's okay. The whole idea of Oakland County is that no, they don't have a link system, to my knowledge, not at this point anyway, but they have community corrections staff in each and every one of the district courts. So they don't really have to have a system because they're there physically getting it. Okay. They can access that information very easily.
So we could go about it that way, and that could be a solution aside, apart from linking the systems, we could physically put people there to do that.
You could. Now my understanding is, again, it's a more expensive way to do it, but it can be done.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Barb.
Hello.
You're rocking it so far. I think you've impressed everybody here. Some good questions. Question I have for you is, how close do you work with community mental health?
Vary on some of our cases. It depends on the situation. Community mental health, really deals with those who are severely and mentally ill, and those individuals don't always translate good to community corrections eligibility because we don't have placements that can manage the level of need that they have. So sometimes we do, and on those occasions it's usually very intensively, but for the most part, most of those cases that we handle would be eligible for us and likely not appropriate for them, or vice versa.
Okay. And the reason why I asked that, there's millions of dollars that's coming in, and I believe it's from the alcohol tax that comes in, and it can only be used for counseling.
Through Macosa, is that what you're referencing?
Well, it's not Macomb. I believe it's community mental health, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. And those funds are for, could be utilized, and there was extra funds brought in the last few years, more than what was anticipated, and I wanted to have it redirected over to you. And I don't have that in front of me, so I apologize. But those funds should be able to be used for what you're doing.
I believe I know what you're talking about. I think it's dollars that come through community mental health through Macosa, and I think that we had met a couple of years ago, maybe, to discuss the possibility of doing that. And there are some issues with the way that those dollars are allocated are for substance abuse services specifically. So it wouldn't be anything we could do with our pretrial programming. It would have to be specifically for substance abuse, is what my understanding is.
And I agree with you. So funds can be relieved from there that you can use for the other portion of what you're doing and backfill it with those funds. Then you're able to get have more funds to do what you need.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
And I have issue that you're not receiving those funds for that, with all the counseling and what you have happening. Again, this is something I'm willing to dig into again. I know it's probably been 3 years. I didn't know it was that long, but
maybe.
I'm going to get back into it because I think we're missing the boat here. And I think and if I'm not mistaken, I'm talking, close to $9 million. So I will get back on my end and do that, and I'll get back in touch with you on that.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me for a second time. This is not a comment specifically to you or anything like that, but so it comes a bit random, but I recall reading an article, I just looked it up online, from MLive almost exactly a year ago, that the state had closed another prison, and that the state's prison population has declined 20% in the last 11 years, and that the state has closed, closed or consolidated more than 25 facilities and camps since 2005, saving $370 million, the Department of Corrections said. So the state has been going through a prison closing and consolidation as crime has declined 20% in the state of Michigan. Makes me wonder if there's used space available, already built, St. Clair County Correctional Facility or some partnership that we could do with the state to take up some of this available corrections facilities. And again, I'm throwing out there randomly, so I don't expect any, it has nothing to do with your presentation. But it just occurs to me, it's strange that we're looking at where we can get dollars to build new prison facilities while the state is trying to figure out what to do with their old ones.
I actually, if you don't mind, can comment on that. The majority of those facilities are in the northern part of Michigan, if not in the Upper Peninsula. And they've been able to do that because they're utilizing programs like ours,
right,
where they're doing alternatives to incarceration, and really looking at the parolee and probation population and providing treatment services and things of that nature. But like I said, the majority of those facilities are in sort of far away.
Sure, it'd be nice to ship the St. Clair County prisoners up to those Upper Peninsula ones and open up some space nearby us. They could just do a little shifting around. Again, it's just a thought. It just seemed odd that they're trying to figure out how to close prisons and we're trying to figure out how to get capacity, that maybe there could be some synergy there. But thank you.
Thank you. Many times we talk about overcrowding, then people bring up the prison on 26 Mile Road. That's filled. They're filled. I know people work up there.
Yes, I'm
so
familiar
forget
with the
that
facility.
One. Okay, the other one is about clothes. when the prisoner is brought from the jail over, they're in uniform, the judge doesn't look that you're in uniform. He's looking at the crime and what he's going to be charged with. The guy that has a suit on, somebody brought clothes, he can change right there in the jail. So it isn't a case of him looking, well, you look in a jumpsuit, you're going to get nailed. The judge doesn't look at that. Okay, the third part is the tether. I know how it works, but everything else, but the tether company gets them out of, who pays for that if they don't come up with the money? How do they do that?
When we receive a referral from a court to allow an individual to be released from the jail with a electronic monitoring device, we meet with that individual and determine if they're able to pay. So we look at their income and other information that we use to determine that. If they are unable, we can provide the hookup fee, which is expensive. And the first couple of weeks up to the first month, we've done several months before, depending on the circumstance, if that individual was more appropriately supervised in the community. So we can provide those dollars with funds that we have to be able to keep them in the community.
Is that a budgeted amount for the county or from the state?
Both. There's actually dollars
So
that
any
come
way
from
you
both.
bite it, if they get out, we the taxpayers are paying for them to get out.
For those individuals, yes.
Okay.
That those are within our budget, like I said, both from the county general fund dollars and those state funds.
And the other thing is, how many, I know you don't know how many at this time, but there's a lot of prisoners, in that jail that just don't get out because nobody bonds them out.
Certainly.
Whether the bond's a low one or a big one.
Yep.
Is that true?
Absolutely.
And that could empty the jail pretty quick.
I don't know if it would empty, but it would certainly reduce the population.
You won't ever have this overcrowding stuff.
We and what we see regularly is individuals who for example, have pretty major medical issues. And so the sheriff's department is responsible for transporting that person if they have an emergency to the hospital. They're responsible for a deputy working overtime to sit with that person 24 hours a day, and which costs about $1,400 a day, I think, when they originally had a $500 bond or something to that effect. So that what we're trying to do is identify those individuals with those very low bonds, particularly in those cases, and make recommendations to those courts to let them know, the person's risk in those situations where they're really sort of putting some hardship on the sheriff's department, what the situation is, and seeing if there's any alternative we can provide to them.
My last question is that you're talking to somebody who did that for many years. So my point is, I've known the fact it's been going on for a long time. Why don't you get together with a hospital, which is the local hospital, and get a room wherever it may be in a hospital? Because there's been many a times that there's 3 and 4 prisoners that are taken to a hospital, and that a deputy has to be brought in right around the clock. Whereas if you got one room, you could have 1 or 2 deputies instead of floating around. I know it's a financial thing, but it's a cheaper way of doing it.
I'm sure it's something that could be explored. I think that some of the issues are that when you have individuals who go in, it's really up to hospital administration and their floor plan where they're housed or if they can be housed together. You also have classification issues in terms of prisoners that can't be in the same room together, things of that nature. So.
It's been going on for years and has not stopped yet. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on what Commissioner Gillette said with respect to the state. And you indicated their jails are emptying because of those types of services, but I'm also hearing, serving on the Michigan Association of Counties Board, one of the issues MAC has is criminal justice reform at the state that clears out their prisons, early paroles and things like that, but doesn't address the problems. So they come back to our community, and the savings that they're achieving are not being funneled back to us to now deal with them. So from our standpoint, we support the idea of not having all these nonviolent offenders in prison. But if they're coming back to the communities are the ones that, specifically counties, but also at the local level for police officers, are the ones that are going to have to deal with them, and that money's not flowing back here. So this whole discussion about not having money for this, the state is saving a lot of money as they're clearing out our prisons, but that's growing our population. So thank you.
I don't have any other speakers on the list. Are there any other questions or speakers? There's a motion on the floor. All those in favor, please. Motion to receive and file. Barb, thank you very much for coming. I appreciated your presentation. I know that you put a lot of work into that.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you knew all the answers, too.
Item number 7, new business. Is there any new business for the committee? Seeing none, we'll go to public participation.
Hello, once again, Macomb County Board of Commissioners, Justice and Public Safety, Joseph Hunt, 8306 Stanley, homeowner and taxpayer, County of Macomb. That was a great discussion because everybody added to the issue about where that current jail study that was a seething, I consider it to be very seething dissertation of exactly how Macomb County is compared with the rest of the other 82 counties in Michigan, and that there's obviously a lot of things that are suggested in that report where money has to be spent in order to solve a problem. I think that I had my question answered to where many of the people who are being processed through the program are in the 37th, 39th, and 40th district courts. And I think Commissioner Smith basically had indicated that south of Hall Road, we don't really have the metrics or such. As City of Warren and Centerline is the 37th District Court, I know that they use the on-base system, as does the County of Macomb. The real matter comes down to is I always believed if you want to basically be successful, you have to replicate success. And over in Oakland County, Sheriff Bouchard happens to be the sheriff of last year, and that's pretty impressive out of 4,000 counties in the United States that he's the #1 guy. So I would think that perhaps maybe Sheriff Wickersham would maybe get with Sheriff Bouchard in a capacity to actually look at the technology that's used over in Macomb County. That's 900 square miles as opposed to our 483. And the issue does come down to, and I think we're getting into the linked systems issue, is I look at the list of bills that are published each month up on the website, and there's a huge amount of infrastructure, IT infrastructure that's coming from the Capital Improvement Fund. That $65 million bond issue, that's not all brick and mortar. It's actually, things called fiber rings and networks and computers. And I guess the real issue comes down to is on whether or not the County of Macomb has even considered hooking up to the district courts in Romeo, New Baltimore, because that falls under the guide of the general fund, and on whether or not that there's even something that was suggested when this was all devised long ago to actually even connect those district courts with the mothership, as I like to call it, or the central server. So, and like I say, I'm just rambling right now. I got my questions answered, and the real issue comes down to is a lot of these initiatives that are taking place come from the State Court Administrative Office. They have this thing called the Justice Information Services, and what they want to do is implement this statewide information technology program. And if I'm not mistaken, the old court administrator, or the retired court administrator, had gone to the State Court Administrative Office. So you already have a contact at the state that might all of a sudden look at the Trial Court Services Management Program and implement this so that community correction services can tap into a common system with a minimal amount of cost to the taxpayers. I agree with Commissioner Romano. We don't want the criminals on the street. I live at 12 in Van Dyke, and I live right around the corner from the county building, the Health and Human Services. That's an interesting parking lot to go into every day. But like I said, I thought that was a very good presentation, excellent feedback and such like that. But more so, why is it that we're spending all this money on infrastructure, but we're not actually getting together with the district courts to solve the problem, getting the criminals off the street and letting the people that do have their substance abuse problem go through recovery and maybe pay back the taxpayers for being drug addicts. But I'll leave it at that. Have a good day.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the committee? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Dujay? We didn't.
Oh, we did? Okay, sorry. I skipped right.
Do you want to go back to new business?
Could we for 1 second?
Sure.
Right, thanks.
We're going to back up to new business.
Sorry about that. I was reading something here because I was reading what to say in new business, and we passed new business. Two things. I know most of you are aware, we sent this out, that the bond issue was sold, or bond was sold and passed yesterday. For some unexplained reason, it was actually at a lower percent than we originally anticipated. That was not anticipated by any of the financial wizards beforehand, so that was purely a fluke, but a good one on our behalf. Second, I just want to speak about yoga at the Hill this weekend. I know there was some other things going on with other commitments and everyone couldn't make it. However, there was over 300 people in attendance, and I just want to thank both, Patty, Bodhi Seed Yoga, and all of our staff for all the work that they put in it. I mean, you have to make this next year. I'm telling you guys, the amount of people that show up for this event is unbelievable, and the way that our staff pulls it off is incredible. I just wanted to point that out to them and thank them. And I guess last, on a personal note, most of you have asked me throughout the year how my wife is doing. And yesterday, after 10 months of surgery and treatment, we got our first good news that she's all clear on her first scan. So I just want to let you guys know. Thanks.
Is there a motion to adjourn? No. Commissioner Dujay, supported by Commissioner Romano. Please vote on your iPad.
Yeah, that's it. No.